Well, good afternoon. We've decided it is afternoon, even though our speakers are on the West Coast today, or half of them are. But on behalf of Clemson Extension School and Community Gardening Programs, I would like to welcome everyone to the last of our third Readers to Eaters Food Literacy Summer Author Series, sponsored by South Carolina Farm to School. I've already mentioned that we are recording this today, and everyone who registered will receive a link to the video. We'll keep everyone's mic muted, and I'll try to remember to pin or spotlight the speaker so that you're seeing the person who's talking. I know it can get kind of confusing with all the heads dancing around. But feel free to, at the end, we'll have time for questions, and you'll be able to, just turn your mic on and ask at that time. Or you can drop chat questions in the chat all along, and we will try to get them answered as we go. So I am going to share my screen so that I can introduce you to today's panel. We have an amazing lineup today. Get this going. If I had this queued up instead of talking, then I would have this already done. But just in case you are kind of new to Zoom, I put a few little things on here to help you find your way around the classroom. And we did send out this morning early a handout with all the links, hopefully, that everyone's going to mention today. And I will also drop that in the chat as soon as I turn this over to our next speaker. So you shouldn't have to scribble down a lot of notes. Hopefully everything's there. And it's my pleasure today to introduce you to our speakers in order of appearance. First, we'll have Ben Cease from the South Carolina Department of Education Farm to School Programs. You've already met me. I'm Amy Dabbs. Next, we'll hear from Stephanie Sox. She's the Director of Promotion and Education at the South Carolina Farm Bureau Federation, and she's going to share more with us about South Carolina Ag in the classroom and the programs that they offer for educators around the state. Next, you're going to get to meet Philip Lee, the co-founder of Readers to Eaters, who is going to introduce us to our award-winning author, Rick Swann. So I'm so excited to welcome you all today for this amazing presentation. So now I am going to turn it over to Ben. Ben, are you ready to roll?
Sure. Hey, everybody. My name's Ben Cease, like Amy Dabbs just introduced me. I work for the South Carolina Department of Education, Office of Health and Nutrition. I coordinate the Farm to School program. Just wanted to welcome everyone. And again, thank you for joining us. South Carolina Farm to School is a proud sponsor of this year's Readers to Eaters Food Literacy Summer Author Series, and we're excited to welcome our panel of speakers today. This type of program directly supports our mission, which is to facilitate communication and education and opportunities for farmers, distributors of foods to schools and locally produced food throughout South Carolina. Food literacy, or the understanding of how our food choices impact our health, environment, and economy, are built into our core elements of programming. These core elements include procurement of local foods to be served in school meals, promoting educational activities related to agriculture, food, and nutrition, as well as creating hands-on learning through school gardening. By enhancing food purchasing and education practices at schools, children and their families are empowered to make more informed food choices. This helps strengthen the local economy and also contributes to vibrant communities. South Carolina Farm to School supports these core elements through a variety of initiatives, and we continue to look for ways to help facilitate these and other important connections. We recognize the significance of food literacy, and we're pleased to sponsor this summer author series. Thank you, Amy. Thank you, everybody, for joining us today. Again, my name's Ben Cease. The handout that was sent out, you can contact me through that. I would love to hear from you if I can help you in any way. Thank you.
Awesome. Thank you, Ben. We are so happy to have you here and for all the work that Farm to School does for us around the state and for your support of this, this initiative this summer. And now I would like to introduce you to Stephanie Socks. As I mentioned before, she is with the South Carolina Farm Bureau Federation, and she's here to share South Carolina Ag in the Classroom resources with us. So you're going to share your screen.
Yes.
I'm going to spotlight you so you can do that. Awesome.
All right. Y'all can see me. Are we good? All right, very good. Well, thank y'all for having me. I'm excited. I'm kind of pinch hitting today. Tracy Miss Kelly is actually our director of Ag in the Classroom, and she is on maternity leave with her precious baby boy Hayes. So we're letting her enjoy her last few weeks home with him before she comes back to the office. So as Amy said, I'm director of promotion education. Ag in the Classroom falls in my department at Farm Bureau. So I'm just going to give you a quick overview of the program and share with you some of the resources that we have available. As you all are probably aware, agriculture is a huge industry in South Carolina. It generates over nearly $50 billion every year, $46.7 billion in economic impact. It supports over 212,000 jobs, and we have over 5 million acres of farmland. And at South Carolina Farm Bureau, we work for the 25,000 farm families across the state, and we cover everything from bees to trees and everything in between. So we love to talk about agriculture, and we love our teachers because y'all are the ones who have the opportunity to make a direct impact with students to help them understand who grows their food, how they grow it, how it's raised, and where they can get more information about that. So the mission of Agriculture in the Classroom is to increase agricultural literacy, and we're all about readers to eaters here. So this is just a really great fit for us. And we cover all, Ag in the Classroom covers all subject areas, not just reading, but really we want to make it accessible for teachers, and we want to make it easy for teachers to integrate our information into your curriculum because y'all have so much on your plate already. My husband teaches agriculture, and he was just texting me that today was the teacher's first day back, and they just met their new director like 5 minutes ago. So y'all have a lot going on, especially in today's climate. So we want to make it as easy as possible to integrate ag into your everyday lessons. So here's just a couple of the resources that I want to share with you. So the National Ag in the Classroom, I'll click over to these websites in just a second. They have outstanding resources from every Ag in the Classroom program across the country. And then, of course, our website, and then American Farm Bureau has their Ag Foundation, and they have tons of resources as well. So one of the things that I think would be particularly interesting for this group is our Book of the Month program. We sell a subscription service, so you can buy a single book for $6, or you can subscribe for $72 a year. And for that $6 a month, you get a book and a lesson plan sent straight to you. And our Women's Leadership Committee helps sponsor this program along with our Farm Bureau. And this book that we just sent out this month was a really nice hardback book. I mean, we've done books before that retail for like $17, and we send them all to you for $6 a month. And so it's a great lesson plan, and it's really, the lesson plan is very detailed. It's much more like a unit plan. I mean, there's tons of resources, tons of activities, and all of these things are aligned to state learning standards because, again, we just really want to make it easy for teachers. And another cool thing before I jump over to our websites that we will be debuting this fall is our Ag Learning Lab. We are super excited about this. It's basically a mobile field trip. It will come to your school. This over on the right side of your screen, that's the outside of the trailer. Then on the inside, we'll have a teacher that is certified and trained by our Ag in the Classroom program to lead students through lessons. They use the Nearpod software, and so each student will have their own iPad to be able to interact with the lesson. And it's very interactive, very hands-on, lots of videos, not a ton of lecture. So we want to make it engaging for students. And then on the outside of the trailer, because unfortunately everybody can't cram in there all at once, we have a lot of other fun activities. We have virtual reality goggles, some games, cornhole, some other cool stuff, all with Ag Facts. The virtual reality videos, we've produced all of those. They're all about South Carolina farmers. We've got one on chickens, one about peaches, and then we'll have the third one will be about soybeans. So some important South Carolina commodities, and we, like I told you earlier, we cover everything from bees to trees. So we're trying to cover all of that in the Ag Learning Lab too. It's $400 to reserve it for a day. But if your school is in the Duke Energy service territory and has at least a 60% free and reduced lunch, you can apply for a scholarship made possible through the Duke Energy Foundation to cover the cost of the Learning Lab to come to your school. So this is something that we're really excited about. We're excited to get this thing out on the road. Some of you may have seen our Ag Simulator before, and this is much more engaging and interactive than the Ag Simulator was. So we're really excited about this resource. So let me jump off of here and pull up these websites really quick so y'all can have a look at this. So on our website, it's just scfb.org. To the front. Resume share. Okay, sorry. Am I sharing now? Can y'all see me?
That's weird. No, it's like a, oh, there we go. Okay, you're back.
I don't know why it is doing that. Okay, it did this to me the other day. Okay, how about now? You can see our website.
Yes.
Okay, so this is our website, scfb.org, and under our Ag Education tab, and we've got tons of stuff under here, but I just wanted to show you the book of the month. So you purchase your subscription right here, and then you can download the lesson plan. Of course, you'll get a printed copy. But then also, so we've been doing this for like a year and a half, something like that, since January 2019. But you can go back to all of our past book of the months, and all of those lesson plans are archived here on our website. So this is just an example of one of them. And like I said, they're very in-depth, and you could really do a whole unit out of this stuff. And they're mainly K through 5 geared lessons. And then let me show you the curriculum matrix. So I think that this is the coolest resource, and I actually use this a good bit. So this is the National Ag in the Classroom, and if you go to their website, Teacher Center, and you just click the curriculum matrix. But in this search bar, you can type anything. So we'll just do bees. And it brings up, just look at all of these lesson plans on bees, all of this stuff, companion resources. So there's activities, maybe you've already got a lesson plan that you like. Maybe you've got a book that you have that you like, and you just need some other activities to go along with it. Tons of stuff, tons of resources here. It's all free. You can make a binder, so the stuff that you like, you can save, and then you have it all in one place, so you don't have to come in and search every time. They also have a store, so a lot of these activities, like there's one for bees where you make like Play-Doh out of beeswax, and which is a lot of fun. But you can order the materials from the Ag in the Classroom store. So it's really handy. It's not expensive, and then you don't have to try to put it all together yourself. It's all nicely packaged for you and all that stuff. So again, we have a ton of resources, and another resource that is so important, it's probably our most invaluable and valuable resource, are our county volunteers. So we have a Farm Bureau in all 46 counties of South Carolina. We actually have 2 in Horry, so we have 47 county Farm Bureaus. And our Women's Committee, our Young Farmers and Ranchers program are all excited about Ag in the Classroom. They love to come to classes and talk about their farm. We've done a lot of virtual farm tours. So we've got folks that are ready and excited to do that sort of thing. So I would encourage you to, on our website, if you go to the county office page, you can find contact information for those county board members, and they can certainly connect with you and help you get agriculture into your classroom. So we thank you for all that you do, and we're so excited to be a part of this summer series, and I hope that y'all enjoy the rest. Y'all have any questions for me?
If anybody has any questions, you can either drop it in the chat or, we can ask. And I'm such a big fan of Ag in the Classroom in South Carolina and at the national level that I feel certain that I can answer any questions because I've used all these resources. And I just discovered the store and I love it because everything's packaged for a classroom teacher. So you're not just getting like onesie twosies of everything. You're getting like 25 or 30 or more of everything. And the price points are so low and, really affordable for the classroom educator or, 4-H agents or whatever you're doing, if you're doing a group, it's great. So, Stephanie, can you go back and share that last screen with your contact information? And then everybody
I'm dropping it. I just dropped it in the chat too.
Oh, perfect. Okay, perfect. Yep. Awesome. So Stephanie Socks, and she put her email and her phone number there. And thank you. Perfect. So you can take your phone out and take a quick snap. And I love the updates to the mobile unit as well. That is really great. So we just thank you. And
yes, yeah, we're so excited. And also, I'll tell y'all, I should have said this earlier. We're doing the last one today, but we always do a summer workshop series, and it used to be a week-long institute where we all gathered together in one place and we did farm tours and that sort of thing. But we're kind of changing how we're doing it. For the last 2 years, we've been virtual because of COVID. But so right now we do a virtual farm tour, a Q&A with the farmer, and then we're working with Implement Ed, a group out of North Carolina, to demonstrate how to integrate some of these lessons into your, your everyday, the stuff that you're teaching every day. So today is the last one. So we'll have another set next summer. We offer 20 renewal credit hours. They are very low cost. Sometimes your county farm bureau will pay for it for you to come for free. So anyway, we think that they're a great experience, and I would encourage you to check out our Vimeo channel. If you just search SC Farm Bureau, and you can see all of those past farm tours that we've had for the workshop series. I'll drop that here too.
Amy, good morning. Good morning, Stephanie. I'd like to ask a question.
Yes, ma'am.
I've been quarantined by my doctor for the last year, and I haven't been back in the classroom. I intend to go back, but not until after some things have happened. My question to you is, with me not being a totally active teacher in my lab, may I still purchase the books?
Absolutely. Yes. Anybody can purchase books of the month. Yes, please do. We would love for you to have them.
So I can contact you, and I can not send them to the school, but send them to my address, my home address.
Yes, ma'am. You surely can.
Thank you so much.
I just want to interject real quick. Hey, Miss Dyer, how are you doing?
Hi, Dan. I've missed you.
Yeah, I missed you too. Farm to School is going to hopefully have some free Readers to Eaters books for Food Literacy Month in September and Farm to School Month in October as well. So that's still in plans. Maybe Mr. Lee can talk about that later, but there may be some opportunities for some free ones as well. And I'll get you some anyway, Miss Dyer. I'll reach out to you.
Thank you so much. You know that they still got me under quarantine, so it's not a fun life, let me tell you.
Miss Dyer, what county are you in?
I'm in Richland.
In Richland, okay.
Yes,
we're going to get on Richland Farm Bureau and get them to. A lot of our counties have bought subscriptions for every elementary school in their district.
Yes, ma'am.
So we're going to get on Richland and get them to do that too.
Thank you.
Thanks, Stephanie.
If you do, could you please contact me? I do have in mind, and Ben can kind of collaborate with me or whatever. Last year was not an easy task to find someone to take over while I'm out. So I would like for them to go to school, but I would like for them to be able to, not be, how do I say this without sounding not positive, but not kind of, and just put somewhere without them being used.
Right. Yeah. We can take care of that.
Okay. So
Thank you.
Thanks, Miss Dyer. Good
Thank
to hear
you.
from you. Glad you're here today.
Yes, ma'am. I'm glad to be here.
Okay, any other questions? I know Stephanie's got another meeting to run to, but we know how to find you.
Yeah.
And we're all excited about the resources, and we love what Tracy and you and Ben are all cooking up with Philip for the free books to come out across the state, and we're really excited about that. So thank you for pinch hitting today and helping us out.
No problem. Y'all have a good afternoon.
Okay, you too.
Thanks.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
All right. Well, I am going to turn this over. I'm going to spotlight Philip Lee, who is the owner of Readers to Eaters, who publishes amazing books that give us a fresh and fun perspective on what we eat and how we eat through good stories, beautiful writing, and a deep appreciation of food cultures. And we appreciate you, Philip Lee. So I'm going to turn it over to you now.
Okay. Thanks, Amy. I just want to quickly add, it's maybe Stephanie's totally off now, but what they do at Farm Bureau is like all the resources is just amazing. The book of the month club, actually some of our books, the thing about bees was just their book of the month selection in May, and we have another book called Farmer Will Allen and the Growing Table. This is also earlier this year. So we work very closely with the Ag in the Classroom program, and they're great resources, as well as the national and the curriculum matrix. So I'll circle back, but I just want to give a quick shout out about the amazing work that they do. It's really useful stuff. So hello everybody. I'm Philip Lee. I'm so glad to work with Amy and Ben on this program, the third of our series. It's been a wonderful, partnership with the food literacy author series this summer. So I co-founded Readers to Eaters with my wife, Junjo Lee, and I'm here in San Francisco. And we started the program very much with school garden in mind. We are basically a book publisher of books about food. We have a special mission to promote food literacy, telling stories about our diverse food cultures. And so, we start out more than anything else, as like I just mentioned, as a publisher, we're storytellers. We're not educators in the sense that we're health and nutritionists telling people what to eat, but we tell stories. We publish stories about people who grow it, cook it, and provide it, and just people in the food system. Some of them are nonfiction, some of them are fictional stories, but they're all ways to give kids to connect with food in new ways, and we start off telling stories about, for the younger kids, what good food means to their body, but also add that conversation as they get older, what good food means to the community, to their environment, to global issues. Again, food connects to us all, and so we use food as a springboard, starting with health and nutrition, but also to culture, about how we all connect as a community tool. Another thing that we try to do in our stories is also introduce kids to new ways about flavor and taste. We actually want kids to think beyond yuck and yum, and by telling stories about food and maybe giving them introduce ideas about the 5 flavors, such as like sour, sweet, bitter, like umami, and as they get more language and vocabulary about the food, they'll actually have a new way to connect with it. And I'll give you one good example is, earlier this year, recently we published a book called Bread Lab, and part of the idea about Bread Lab is making bread through sourdough starter. And, kids usually when they hear sour, it's like, oh, they like pinch your nose, and they kind of step away. And in fact, we do these demonstrations, like here's a sourdough starter and you can smell it. And again, like usually they say, oh, it's sour, they make a face. But there's an actual bread lab in Washington State. They are part of the extension program in Washington State University. And they talk about, they study the seed to loaf kind of discussion, like how do you, I mean, really starting from the soil. And they talk about sour as an cross between grass and lemon. And that's something that's very familiar with kids and usually pretty positive experience. And so when I hold up the same jar and say, here's a sourdough starter, and can you smell the grass and lemon? And they're like, oh, let me try. Like, and it's almost instantly given something to think about. And that relationship almost instantaneously changes. And that's the power of sometimes giving more vocabulary to kids to think about food. And obviously all the many words that we, the wine experts use to describe food, and say, well, we only have more words to describe, bread and all the many foods that we eat. So like that's something that we do in our stories, is like, giving them more of a flavor experience, but it becomes a vocabulary builder. It's really literacy as well as just food. And then also a sensory experience. So sometimes it's not just taste, but it's like, well, what does it sound like? What is it, certainly what does it feel like? What's the texture? Is it fuzzy? Like if you feel the leaves, or, you pick up a peach and it's all fuzzy, or you pick up an avocado and it's like a dinosaur egg, and so it's like getting this new sensation for them to think about food, and not just beyond taste, but also in that whole sensory experience. So that's the stories that we talk to with kids, and some of the books that we publish. And again, and the more words that they have, the more stories they connect with food beyond just what's good for them to eat, then it actually empowers them to think about, certainly growing food, making changes in their lives, but also, just being more empowered. So, and what's great is a garden is often the best place to start, because there's all these elements in there. Like you'll have all the sensation, all the taste that you can pick right out of the garden, so that's a very kind of the work that we do in the books that we publish. And also I want to highlight something we do is also Reader to Eaters. Is actually describes the books that we publish, but also the partnerships that we do. So we work with the reader side, like schools and classroom and libraries, our traditional kind of customers of books, and certainly, working with them about books about food. But like libraries, example, are really becoming food hubs. And they've become great advocates and partners in food, especially in the case of public libraries. Now, of course, there are a lot of programs, a lot of books, a lot of programs, but now many libraries we work with across the country are actually feeding kids during the summer meal programs. And they're doing very creative things. And I'm so glad that, the last segment of the summer food series, Amy had the South Carolina State Library come and speak about their wonderful program. And I hope you all, if you haven't seen it, go back to that episode, and maybe we can put up the links to that last episode and with that discussion. But libraries themselves are becoming, the readers are becoming food hubs, and we also work with the eater side. We work with many food programs, everything from farmers markets, food banks, the WIC programs, SNAP Ed programs, and their focus is promoting nutrition education, but now they get to promote nutrition education through books and promoting literacy, reading, as well as nutrition. And so that we do a lot of that partnerships, and so it's wonderful that us, the publisher, using a book has been able to connect a lot of communities in new ways and finding the readers and the eaters. And so I will, certainly share more resources we, late after. And so today I'm especially happy to introduce Rick Swann. And so he's our very first author. Again, like I said, the gardens very much connection to us is really what inspired the start of Readers Eaters. And Rick Swann was our very first author. And this book, Our School Garden, is our very first book. And in fact, not just our very first book, when it was published in 2012, it was one of the very first books for kids about school gardens. At the time, it was still, there's a lot of information for adults on how to create one, but not really actually nothing for kids to think about how they can really create that relationship with the school garden. And that, is the brilliant, and Rick is a school librarian, was a school librarian, at the time he was writing a book. And I think that's what's really, brilliant about his work, is be able to connect the garden itself, but how it relates back to kids as an educator, but also how it relates to the classroom curriculum. So really happy to, publish this book, our very first book, and I'll just turn this over now to Rick. Thank you all.
Thank you. Rick, we're so excited to have you here. I know you're getting ready to share your screen. But I just have to say, like, what an honor it is to have you. And even though our numbers are a little low today with people because our schools have already started here in South Carolina, a lot of people are signed up waiting for their link. So they want to see what's going on today, because I don't even know how many, I know it was about 200 or more of your books were sent out across South Carolina last year to our students who are learning how to be school gardeners. And our students are teachers, and librarians and school nurses and all those folks. So you have a huge following here. Tons of kids have heard this book and read it with their teachers, and we can't believe you're here. So thank you for joining us.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm out in Seattle. So I guess I probably have really different weather than you do there. It's in the 70s today. I've actually only been to South Carolina once, and it was about 45 years ago. So sorry about that. But I am a big fan of Don Staley and Asia Wilson. So I don't know if you have any basketballers there. So I need to take a second now to share screen. And okay, looks good, right? That works. I'm actually I'm going to talk about libraries full of life, school gardens, and last minute literacy. I have last minute in the title, which I added since in the last several weeks, because I realized that I went on to the site and I realized that in South Carolina, you have this Ag in the Classroom program that does so many great books, and they're complete lesson plans. And I want to differentiate kind of what I'm talking about with that sort of complete unit based on a book. As a school librarian, I can't tell you the number of times teachers came running to me at the last minute because their carefully crafted gardening plan was wiped out by rain or maybe a heavy wind. Maybe in South Carolina, it's more like extreme heat event. I'm not sure. It's easy to grab a book off a shelf and make an interesting gardening plan out of it. And that can include follow-up activities. So how to do that will be my focus today. And I also want to put a plug in that, it's nice to have a little shelf of great books, and you should work with your school librarian or your local librarian to figure out what are the best titles for you. Because just having a few books sitting around that you can grab at the last minute is just a great idea. So this is the picture of the fictional school garden in my book, done by the illustrator, Christy Hale. It looks wonderful and sunny. That's the great thing about a book. This is when I wrote the book, this was the garden at my school, not when I first started at that school, because when I was first there were just two small garden beds. And I was the school librarian and one of three teachers who wanted to greatly expand the school garden so more classes could use it. So as librarian, I ended up doing most of the research for the presentations that we had to do, the principal and the staff and the PTA to help that happen. So our school garden was based on that and other further research I had to do for the book. But during and since that time, I've done a number of presentations about using books with kids to support garden education, both at the district-wide level in Seattle, Washington State level, and I've done a few national talks as well. My background though, my grandparents were potato farmers, and I spent all the summers of my youth helping on the farm because that's extended families work. and with an farm family. And in fact, for 1 year, I lived on the farm when I was young, when my grandparents tried to get my dad to leave teaching to take over the farm full time. It was my mom's family. My dad got talked into trying it for a year, but after trying it for a year, he decided he preferred teaching. But one of my strongest childhood memories is going out into the field beside our house. And it was on the 4th of July. I was 5 years old and digging with my hands down into the dirt under one of these very nondescript green plants. It didn't look anything like potato, and finding potatoes. I mean, it was just this wonderful experience. I still have such a strong memory of it. It's one of my earliest and strongest memories. And in fact, this week when I was prepping for this talk and a talk I did yesterday to a bunch of kids, I ended up writing a poem, and I actually was going to share this, if that's okay with you guys, because it kind of describes my relationship to the farm in a way. It's called Red Dirt because the Connecticut River Valley, where the farm is sandstone, and the dirt is red. And anywhere I go where there's red dirt, I just think of the farm. So this says, red dirt takes me back to early July, age 5, in the field that stretched a half mile to my grandparents' house, digging new potatoes for dinner. The plain green plants with small white flowers looked nothing like what I was supposed to find, fingers scrabbling to detect thumb-sized rocks and tubers. It was like fumbling in the dark to locate favorite toys, except for the smell of earth that clung to the skins and the wonderment of it all. Within the year, I'd be working alongside my sister, cousins, and a bus full of Puerto Rican men, filling wooden barrels taller than me with potatoes bigger than my fists. The chattering in Spanish as baffling as my mother's uncontrollable sobbing that had not stopped for 2 weeks. My grandfather planted in the same red dirt. My grandmother ended up leasing the land for a number of years, and until my youngest cousin decided to take on the farm. So my youngest cousin, Nancy Barrett, is one of a growing number of women farmers. She's had to diversify to survive, but she does everything from pumpkin patches to organic beef, berries, and she sells at a lot of farmers markets. She does everything. She has a farm stand. This view belonging to blueberries is sort of hardwired into my brain, looking out at the pasture where there's usually cows. That tree on the right side is a black walnut tree where as kids, we'd always get out our hammers right before Thanksgiving and have to break open the black walnuts, which are really hard to crack, and pick out the meat. And that little piece of fence, I had to whitewash hundreds of feet of fence every summer in high school. So yeah, so I have strong memories about the farm. My family's decided not to be farmers, but we always had an enormous garden, and we put lots of food by. People do less of that now, but my mom, we'd spend weeks canning, getting ready for winter. And then my siblings and I always had large gardens ourselves. I had to give up my garden 18 months ago. I didn't have to, I guess, but I chose to move near my daughter to help out with my new granddaughter. But they have a huge garden, and so I spend a lot of time still gardening. This time watching Sylvie there, and my daughter's now rueing. She got ever-bearing raspberries because you get about couple dozen berries a day, and Sylvie gets every last one of them. She goes out there and picks it. And right now we're working with her on not picking the green tomatoes, waiting till they're red. But gardens are still an enormous part of my life. So when we picture a school garden, we picture something like this. But those of us who work in them know that there are days when it's actually miserable to be outside with kids, and it can be a last minute thing. That's a great time to bring in books, although they can and should be used to reinforce garden lessons all the time. And you can even read a book while sitting outside with your class in the garden and contemplating it. So I'm going to look at a few poems in the book, and then we're going to go on to look at a few books after that and just talk about how you can make a quick lesson plan from it. This poem from my book, The Enormous Carrot, I was talking about this in depth because it comes from three very disparate experiences. At my school, before we added all the different beds, we had 3 classrooms sharing 2 small beds. And one class planted carrots, and about 3 weeks later, another class came around and weeded out all the little carrots, because they do look a lot like weeds, you have to admit, the little carrot tops before you have the roots that you can tell are carrots. And so that was one story. Then my grandmother, not my farmer grandmother, but the other one, always told me the story about the enormous turnip. That was one of her favorite folk tales to tell. About a man growing this enormous turnip, and it was so large he couldn't pull it out by himself. So first he got his wife, and then his granddaughter involved, and a dog and a cat, and finally it took a mouse, all of them pulling together to pull this enormous turnip out of the ground, which I like it because it's a story of cooperation. And then back to the mystery of digging potatoes for me. And I thought, roots, you do not know. You do not know what's growing underground. You can't see it. And there's a mystery every time I dig up potatoes. I still dig up potatoes. And just there's a mystery of it because I never know what I'm going to get. How big are they? How many do I get this year? Are they going to be diseased? You don't even know that. So this poem is called The Enormous Carrot. I see you growing in our garden bed, long feathery leaves. A weed, I declare. Jessie agrees, so I try to pull you out. You won't budge. Help me pull, I shout to Shannon. Then I reach down for another tug as Shannon tugs on me. It still won't budge, I shout again. So Jessie lends a hand, but in the end, we need Julie too to finally yank you free. After tumbling down, we all laugh at the surprising way we learned today that carrots grow underground. And the information block says, did you know that we eat all different parts of plants? Carrots are roots of plants and grow underground. Peas grow in pods that hang from vines, but peanuts grow as underground pods. We eat the leaves of many plants, such as spinach and lettuce. And we eat celery and rhubarb. We eat the stalks, not the leaves. Have you ever eaten an artichoke? It's a flower. So, of course, you can have an immediate discussion with kids about different parts of plants, what parts we eat, what parts we don't eat. And then even, and then it's, for me, there's then you can extend this activity. You could talk about the history of the vegetables. Vegetables are fascinating because they've all moved, all the common vegetables have moved all around the world. And so it's hard to know looking at a vegetable where it came from. The wild carrot, for instance, is indigenous to Europe, North Africa, Western Asia, first cultivated in Persia. And the carrot cultivation spread. And originally it was purple and yellow until the orange roots appeared in Spain and Germany, 500 years ago. And now you're starting to see, again, going back to, other colors. Now when I go to the farmer's market, you can get a rainbow display of carrots. You're starting to get other colors again. For a while it was only orange. Philip and I worked closely with the Ozette, with a potato, the only potato that's in North America that came straight from Peru. Potatoes originated in Peru. They went to Europe and then came to the United States from Europe. We have the only unchanged potato. It came directly up the coast from Peru about 300 years ago, almost 300 years ago. It was a group of sailors, Spanish sailors, and they spent a winter on the Olympic Peninsula, and they planted potatoes. And then a year later, they abandoned the area, but the Ozette tribes out in Nia Bay continued to grow the potatoes, and so now they're recognized as an Ark of Taste crop by the Slow Food. And Philip and I helped school gardens throughout Washington State grow them, and so we're part of history in a way. You can do excuse me, you can pick any vegetable and really find that it has a fascinating history. Okra is another one. It's from Africa, North Africa, grew wild along the Nile River. It spread, and it was probably introduced by French colonists coming here in the early 1700s. Pill bugs they're something I used when I was a second and third grade teacher, classroom teacher for a number of years, and before I became a librarian. And I always did a unit on pill bugs because they're easy to find. It turns out they're all over the world other than Antarctica, but they're easy to find, and they're such fascinating little critters. The kids love them. And we used to just do food preferences experiments, and we'd give them different foods and see what they chose to eat, and we'd graph it and whatnot. And when I was studying them, it was what interested me was how many crazy names they had, because I grew up on the East Coast, and we call them different than what they call them out here, and you probably call them something in South Carolina, and so they're kind of interesting. So this poem goes like this: pill bugs. Julie yells, potato bug. Shannon shouts out, cheese log. Jesse bellows, doodle bug. And Simon grunts, Chucky pig. We search the garden where you lurk under logs and rocks, leaves and sticks. And when I find you, I cry out too, roly-poly garden pill. So the woodlouse has, so like I said, it's crazy names: Sowbug, Slater, Grammar Style, Butcher Boy, Carpenter, a few more. A woodlouse is fun to watch because it can curl itself into an armored ball like a miniature armadillo. This helpful creature creates rich soil by eating dead plants and pooping out important nutrients, little pills for your garden. And you really can't study the garden without talking about the animals that live in it. And some of them are beneficial. Some of them are pests, considered pests. Like out here, we have slugs. But there's so many things you can talk about once you bring garden critters in. And there are so many individual books about bees. Philip showed one earlier, and butterflies, and slugs, and snails, and lots of nonfiction books about beetles. So, this is a great conversation to have with kids on a rainy day. A found poem actually is just a poem where you don't write the words yourselves; you just pick words out of something that's already been written. When I was studying the history of school gardens, I came across these great posters. There's a couple pictured in the illustration. And we eat because we work. It says up there, we belong to the U.S. School Garden Army, which, boy, once I saw that poster, I said, what? The U.S. School Garden Army? And the other one's a poster about a victory garden. This is the found poem I wrote. So the first half is words I wrote, and then the second half are just sayings off the posters. Found poem. The garden sleeps in winter, but not our class. We learn about victory gardens by studying war posters from the past. I use their slogans for my found poem. We eat because we work, grow vitamins at your kitchen door, eat what you can and can what you can't, raised them myself in my US school garden, grow for it. And during World War I and II, the United States government encouraged people to grow food in victory gardens at homes and schools, so that food from farms could go to soldiers abroad. In 2009, with the help of school children, First Lady Michelle Obama created a victory garden at the White House as a way to promote healthy eating. What was interesting when I went to study the history of school gardens was just how prevalent they were over 100 years ago. At the turn of the 20th century, maybe the end of the 19th century, school gardens were developed in this country because the population was shifting from rural to urban, and people had a distrust of cities and thought that kids raised in the city were going to grow up damaged in some way. So school gardens were supposed to help alleviate that by fostering better nutritional habits, because You know, if you're not eating fresh farm food, you're not eating right. Teaching responsibility and character building, because, oh my gosh, suddenly these kids, they didn't have farm chores to do. So we have to fix that. And allowing urban children to connect with nature. So it's a lot of the same reasons more recently too. But what happened was World War I happened. And suddenly there were major food shortages. Many of the farms in Europe were destroyed by the war. And America had to ship food abroad for both civilians and for the troops, including our own troops. So someone in the government realized, so we had food shortages in the United States, and someone in the government said, wait a minute, we have all these school gardens. We'll have them grow food to make up for the farm food that, you know, isn't going to hit the markets. And so they actually created a very formal school garden army group. And it totally worked. 2.5 million kids signed up to be part of this. In 1919, for instance, school gardens produced over $750 million of produce in today's dollars. Seattle School, for instance, in 1919 planted 30,000 pounds of seed potatoes and over 10,000 seed packets of vegetables. So Seattle itself, schools grew $1.5 million of produce a year during World War I. And that food was just distributed to the neighbors and to the neighborhoods around the school. So it was really a grassroots kind of endeavor. Victory Gardens came along at the start of World War II. It was like a spontaneous eruption of gardening. And it turns out all these kids who had learned to garden when they were in school at the time of World War I thought, oh, war, food shortages, we need to grow food. And a lot of these community gardens that were started as Victory Gardens in World War II are still in existence. So that the community garden in America really spread because of the Victory Garden movement, which all goes back to school garden education back at the turn of the century. So it's kind of an interesting thing. There's just a little bit of a summary of some of those things that I mentioned. So a great activity to do with kids is make posters. Posters are, you know, kids need to learn how to communicate, and posters are combining graphics with language. And so you have a pithy, almost a poem, a line of poetry, you know, a pithy saying with an interesting graphic. And there's not a better lesson you can do out there. So I just, you know, this is a follow-up to any kind of gardening activity. Here's one: you've got the power. Eat your colors is a great phrase, by the way. Eat your colors. To make a garden grow is to love. To keep a community alive is to love. You know, great lines. Microorganisms will do the work. Compost. Always plant plants and give them what they want. And look how that goes from seed to a giant tree. So posters, I highly recommend doing posters with kids. And those victory posters and U.S. school garden posters can be found on the Library of Congress website. So they're pretty easy to find. If you just go to the Library of Congress, has a huge website of searchable website. And you just type in victory posters or garden posters and you can pull them up. And so if you have access to the school library or whatever, and you want to do a unit that looks at some of those, it's very easy to do. So this is a what's called a shape poem, or you could call it a picture poem or a concrete poem. From the book, this is called Spring Plant Sale. Seedlings, we have so tenderly cared for you, sowing your seeds, watering your soil, providing your light and measuring your growth. But you've outgrown your pots. Now it is time for you to go forth, to set your roots deep in rich earth, to reach up toward the sunlight and bear fruit. And don't wait until the ground gets warm to plant seeds. Many schools grow baby plants indoors in the late winter and then host a spring plant sale to raise money for seeds and other garden supplies. Some schools grow extra seedlings to share with community organizations that help low-income families. Why not do both? And so shape poems are, again, just a great activity to do with kids. And it doesn't actually have to be a poem. It can be a knitting, but the kids will get a thrill if they can do it in the shape of an earthworm, in the shape of a zucchini squash, in the shape of beans or any kind of fruit or vegetables or garden critters, in the shape of a butterfly, and then get to illustrate it. So that's just a great activity that you can just whip out and do with kids. And here's my attempt at a carrot. And I suppose, doing it, getting a highlighter out, orange and green highlighter would have made that 10 times better. I'm going to talk about a few other books, not just my book. And so these are, I think everybody that does garden education needs to have 3 or 4 books that they just have in their back pocket to use with kids, because you never know when it might present itself. So a couple of these books I'm doing because they're brand new books, and a couple of the books I'm going to talk about are just standby classics. This is a new book, a recent book. This is called Harlem Grown. It's a true story, so this is nonfiction. Tony Hillary, the founder of Harlem Grown, narrates the story of how an urban farm grew across from an abandoned lot that was just across the street from Harlem's PS 175, an elementary school. So the lot was cluttered with wrecked couches and old TVs, and it had broken bottles and empty cans. And so when, as he's referred to in the book, Mr. Tony visits his school, he sees those kids in that haunted lot across the street. He gets an idea. And so working with the kids, he and the kids clear the lot. They bring in clean dirt and plant vegetables. And, this is a great inspirational story that can lead to talks about how to better your community service, access to good food. And then a great thing is, which I did at my school, is to actually get the kids get a group of kids to write a history of your own school garden. Like, how did it come about? Get it written down before whoever helped form it. If it's there long enough, people will no longer remember what was the impetus to get it started. You need the founders. You need to talk about the original garden, and oral histories. You could do. I had some kids do a video of it. Kind of like a news show, but you could do a written history, PowerPoint. You could make it into a book. But it's nice to have a history of your school garden. I can't think what would be better. And then you could have it in the library, so it's saved for all time. So 20 years from now, kids could go back and see, we have information to how that garden started. So it's a good idea. This is a classic book, a great book. I really recommend having this on your list. In The Ugly Vegetables, a girl's mom grows vegetables, tradition to Chinese cooking, but the girl wishes that her mom grew flowers like the neighbors. In the end, the neighborhood comes together to share their flowers with her family, and her mom cooks what she calls an ugly vegetable soup to share with the neighbors. So the young gardener learns that regardless of appearance, everything has its own beauty and purpose. And you always have kids. Why are we growing this? Why don't we grow this or whatever? And I think school gardens have room for flowers too. By the way, I don't think it should just be all vegetables. But think of all the discussions you can have around a book like this. Like, what vegetables do you think are beautiful? What do you think are ugly? What vegetables do you look at and they make you want to eat them? What are vegetables that you love to eat? And, based on how they look, you might not think that. What's the weirdest looking vegetable? What's the most beautiful one? And you also, with this, can talk again about the history and migration of plants. This story is just tells you exactly why plants migrate. People want to bring their fruits and vegetables they're used to eating with them when they move. So it just there's a lot of discussions you can have around this book. The Dirt Book. This is another brand new book just out on the market. Dirt Book, poems about animals that live beneath our feet. Fact-filled poems. It's very information oriented about soil, what makes it and who lives in it. What would a gardener be without dirt? So at some point you have to talk about dirt and soil, and this book complements those discussions and complements times when students, have to go out and dig or have just been digging in the garden, or, like I said, you're doing a soil lesson. And then it's spring. This book's been out not a real long time, but a few years. So following a snow-filled winter, a young boy and his dog decide they've had enough of all that brown, and they're going to plant a garden. So they dig it, and they plant, and they wait, and they wait some more, and they wait some more. And, maybe the brown eventually becomes a better shade of brown, and spring finally might start coming. But, particularly the younger your kids are, the harder the struggle with the anticipation of waiting for your garden to your seeds to sprout and your garden to grow. Another thing that happens in Seattle, I don't know if it happens in South Carolina, but we plant our gardens and then they're just starting to get good and school lets out for the year. So we actually have, big harvest festivals the first couple of weeks of school when kids come back at the end of the summer. And so one of the harder things to do in Seattle with school gardens is, setting up a watering and weeding schedule and harvesting schedule over the course of the summer. To making sure that there can be a big harvest festival in September when things like tomatoes are really roaring along. But there's a whole cycle, a whole year cycle to a garden, and so this book's a good entree into that. You can talk to the kids about fallow times and harvest time and planting times and whatever. I love this book, Tops and Bottoms. I love reading it to kids. Kids love this book. So this trickster tale has roots both in the kind of European folk tales and the slave stories of the American South. You have a lazy bear. He's sleeping through the plant. He sleeps through the planting season. And so his land, kind of goes to waste. So Hare makes a deal, trickster Hare. So he and his family will work Bear's land if Bear will split the crops in half. And so Hare will even let Bear choose which half he wants, tops or bottoms. And of course, based on what Bear says, Hare decides what to plant. So if he says tops, then, we're going to plant carrots. If he says bottoms, then we're going to plant lettuce. So it's kind of like the enormous carrot poem I talked about earlier. You can talk about all the different parts of plants that we eat, and it's a fun story besides. For a little bit younger kids, Lola Plants a Garden is just a good made-up story, fiction story about what goes into planting a garden. Your conversation then could be around, okay, here's the book. What did we do in the garden? How does Lola's garden different than ours? And you get kids to start reflecting on what really it is to plant and maintain a garden, because not every garden is exactly the same. And this is the last book here that I have on this list. This is Yum Que Rico. And this is a collection of haiku that celebrates foods native to the Americas. So there's haiku about peanuts and blueberries and corn and potatoes and tomatoes. There's nothing better to do with kids than haiku. They're simple, they're fun. And again, this is, we talk a lot about native plants here. And we actually at Bagley, there's a native plant garden as well as the school garden. And this is a book that you can start that conversation about, what grew here before people started moving food around. These are all, and you could do haiku anytime in the garden by going out and writing about what you're seeing. But you also can write haiku about anything that has to do with the garden. So it's just a very short, easy thing to write about. So it's a lot of fun. I would argue that any book about gardening and plants or even seasons can work and lend itself to a discussion. I'm going to talk briefly now just about how to do an active read aloud. Sometimes you can find that under dialogic reading too, librarian talk, dialogic reading. But it's just a way to read any book that has to do with gardening and basically make it into a very interactive lesson. And it's basically just about asking questions as you read. It's what school librarians do a lot. I'm going to just go through these 4 things quickly, but then I'm going to give some examples, which will make it seem really easy, actually. Recall prompt is just asking what happened earlier in the book, or maybe from an earlier lesson and how it applies to the book. So maybe it's something you already read to them, different book, or a lesson you gave, or something you did in the garden. An open-ended prompt is just an open-ended question, but it's used here mostly to ask questions before you start reading, maybe about the pictures in the book. Asking kids, what do you think is going to happen here? Or what do you think is happening here? And then who, what, where, why, how questions. A distancing prompt, this is super important in terms of leaving kids, if kids can connect knowledge with their own lives, it sticks in their brain better. So having students be able to relate the book to something in their own lives. And maybe, again, it could even be something that you did in a garden lesson, maybe last year or a couple of months ago, or something that they observed. That's just going to make this whole thing make more sense to kids. So I'm just going to give a couple of quick examples. And originally I thought, maybe I'll read a book and do it. But then I thought I could do a couple examples on a poem and it will go a lot faster. So the one you do before you start is you do these sort of open-ended questions. So with this, before I would show the students pictures, and I say, well, a good question would be, what time of year do you think this is? And how do you know that, or why do you think that? And why do you think kids are shoveling? So just have them think about this before you start. And hopefully they notice that he has a scarf around his neck. The other kids have hoodies on, it's cold. So they're doing something in the garden. And then if they answer, oh, it's winter, it's like, well, what could you possibly be doing in the garden in winter? That's a open-ended follow-up question. And then I would read the poem or read the story. And if it was a story, I might occasionally stop and ask a question. In this case, I probably will just read it because it's fairly quick. Compost. The compost warms my hands as my cold fingers wriggle into the crumbly mix like fat burrowing worms. We share the shoveling on this cold, crisp day, our steaming breath blending with the compost steam. We work like dogs. No, we work like worms to make the black gold that turns garden soil rich. And the text is something is rotten in your garden and you should be glad it's your compost pile, a mix of decaying leaves, vegetable scraps, and other plant materials. It's nature's way of recycling. You need to turn over the pile regularly to make the best compost. Compost is so good for you, for your soil. It's sometimes called black gold. A recall prompt for this might be if you've done a compost lesson anywhere along the way, you would ask a question about from that lesson, something you hoped kids took away from the lesson. Another question might be, well, what did we do with the tomato or bean or squash plants we pulled out of the garden at the end of mowing season? Because if kids have been working in the garden for a while, or what did we do with the lettuce that went, that bolted, or hopefully you are doing composting and you're not just throwing those things in the trash. And that might be a why question. Why don't we throw our old plants in the trash? How is composting a form of recycling? In the text, it says it's nature's way of recycling, but it doesn't really say how. So you want kids to do the how part of that. How is composting a form of recycling? A distancing prompt in Seattle, this is easy because, and I don't know if that's true, and it's not true everywhere, but in Seattle, we have composting. Our food waste scraps go into a compost bin that the city picks up. It's part of trash collection, and that also our schools collect the food waste in the cafeteria. And so I would want to have kids connect that activity. How is the food waste bin in the cafeteria related to this poem about composting? What do you do with your food scraps at home? What is that? How does that relate to composting? And maybe we'd end up with a conversation about Cedar Grove Compost, which is the composting company that does all the city food waste, and by the way, is a huge a huge resource for school gardens in Seattle, because most of the school gardens in Seattle got free compost to start their school gardens from Cedar Grove Compost. So we have a good relationship with them, and they've been very supportive of school gardens. So you want to relate the lesson to as many things as you possibly can. You might want to talk about worms and worms' role in the garden. Maybe you've had lessons about worms, or if you hadn't, you'd say, well, what do you mean we work like worms? What do you think worms have to do with making garden soil rich? So you want to just come up with, just ask questions, and each kids' answers often lead to new questions. So you just get used to asking questions. This one I have to apologize for. I somehow lost the PDF to this graphic, so I had to take a picture on my phone, and it's not quite as slick as the other ones. So if I'm looking at this picture, I'd say, what time of year is this? And why do you think what time of year is this? And why do you think that? Because in the previous one, it was obviously cold. This, you can tell that they are planting. You can see those are seed packets. And so you want kids to talk about that. And then I say, well, you can then expand on that. You could say, well, when do we plant crops at different times? And I know in Seattle, we plant some things in the fall that winter over, like kale, Brussels sprouts. They're getting planted now and for harvesting next spring. And then, we plant in February, you plant radishes and peas, but then you don't plant tomatoes till May. So we have different planting seasons. So, you can ask further and further questions about the planting. And hopefully your kids have some garden experience. So, you can start talking about seasons and how different plants you have to plant at different time. Then I would read the poem. Three sisters. I wish I had a sister, I tell Simon as I slowly mound the earth. We cratered the hilltops to hold water. Then we began to bury our seeds. Sister Corn, I plant in the center. She'll stand tall for support. Sister Squash, Julie plants at the edge. She'll protect the soil and roots. Bean, Simon puts between her sisters. She'll hug them both as she climbs toward the sun. Planting them together is companion planting, like Julie and Shannon and me. The three sisters, corn, squash, beans, were the most important crops for many Native American diets. In companion planting, they are planted together so the corn can give support to the bean vines. The beans can put nitrogen in the soil to help the corn grow, and squash protects the roots of the other plants and cuts down on weeds. It's one happy and delicious family. For a recall question here, the first one that I would ask would be, how is Michael feeling differently now than his first day of school? Because he didn't, if you remember in the story, he didn't know anybody the first day of school, and now suddenly he's companion planting. So that would be a recall question that would be within the book. Another recall prompt is, what did we plant in the garden this year? And then how did we plant it? Because they are planting in mounds. A lot of things, you plant singly or you plant in rows. And so then you can have a discussion about that. Who, what, where, why, how questions. Why is it called companion planting? They have to kind of suss that out a little bit. And what is a companion? I guess you should start with first. Make sure they understand what a companion is. And then it also doesn't say how does squash protect the roots of the other plants and keep down weeds. And you could see if they can suss that out as well. So those are good questions. You also could talk about when do we plant corn in South Carolina, or when do we plant beans or squash in South Carolina? A distancing prompt, again, that's the one I think is really important. And I might ask questions like, well, what other plants or animals have you seen or read about that help each other? There are a lot of animals that have, my brain's failing me. There's that relationship between animals, symbiotic relationships. So, and between plants and animals and different animals. So you could talk about that and how, like you have the cattle egrets that follow the cows around the pasture. How do they help each other? That would be a good one. You also could ask the question, who supports you in your life? So that's another question that brings this poem back to their personal lives. I'm just going to end with, I'm not going to play this, but I want you to, if you feel like you need further reinforcement, this is a wonderful video of a woman reading a read aloud and asking questions as she goes. And the name of the book it's Gail Gibbons' Vegetables book. So it's very applicable. And you can see exactly how she does it. So if you feel like you just need more information on how to do or want more, a different example of an active read aloud, this video I highly recommend. So I've added it in here, and I think Amy has a link there that she can send on to you as well. And that is it. And I do have time for questions as well. So.
Awesome. Yeah. And thank you so much. We did put that link to the read aloud in the handout already. And then sort of some other links have popped up over in the chat, and Megan's noting those. So we'll do a follow-up email. So yeah. All right. Anybody got any questions? That was so good. I learned a lot. Everybody to drop their questions. Ben shared the link to the Library of Congress posters that you mentioned, so we can I'll go back and look at that. And Shannon, who is one of our 4-H agents here in South Carolina, also shared an article about 4-H kids being involved in that Victory Garden initiative as well, and how that can connect back for some of those folks. So that was awesome. Yeah, don't you know, like after you talk for a while, like you stop, like common words just like leave your brain. Although symbiotic is not really a common everyday word. So
yeah, I don't think I've used that word at least during the pandemic, when I haven't been speaking as much to other people anyway. So it's like I feel like my vocabulary shrank through disuse.
Exactly. So. All right. Well, people are not jumping up with questions right now, so I'm going to jump in.
Okay.
Some door prizes, and maybe that while we're doing that, they'll get their questions together. So you all know that we have shared Rick's book, Our School Garden, far and wide, but we have a little stash of some autographed copies that we will be sharing at the end to our handout. So let's find out who is going to be taking. We're not taking them home because we'll have to send them to you, but it looks like we have Alonzo McDonald, Amber Still, Barbara Dyer. I couldn't say it, Barbara, that you were on the list. Meredith Schwindeman, Alice Carter, Jennifer Jean, Joelle Toner, Ozina Harfield, Jennifer Boone, and Mary Simzar. So if you are a winner, you just need to reply to an email that Megan will send out. Megan Shearer, she's with our program. She is the program assistant for the School and Community Gardening Program. She'll email you and get your mailing address, and then we will put one of these in the mail to you. So along with some other goodies from Farm to School. Thank you, Ben. And we're really excited about that. So thank you for signing those books, Rick.
Yeah.
So yeah.
Amy, if I can add something, I just want to go back and respond to something that Ben had suggested earlier, 2 things. So yeah, with books, actually, so we have some folks that's on his way to Ben's office. And so there'll be more about books to share. So I want to thank you, Ben, in the Farm to School program. And also Ben made reference to Food Literacy Month. And I just want to point out to everybody that September is Food Literacy Month. It's mostly celebrated so far in the West Coast as formally recognized by the state, and then many communities across the country, cities, regions are celebrating Food Literacy Month, in which the month of September is really started as a way to promote food education, and promote partnerships between schools and community organizations to promote food education. And it's also a really nice lead-in for many of you garden educators into October, which is National Farm to School Month. And so like a lot of teachers and librarians and even, cafeteria programs can have a whole fall education programs, to lead in. And so I hope to see some of that goes on in South Carolina. And if anybody want any suggestions about some of these partnerships, feel free to write me and contact me, and I'll have to offer some suggestions. So just want to add that. Thank you.
That's awesome. Lots of nice comments. Everybody's excited that won door prizes. Sorry, just making sure I said that right. Yeah. So if you'll email Megan your address where you want your door prize sent, that would be great. But she will follow up and just make sure we get everybody who won their signed copies. So thank you so much. All right. It's been a long time since I've worked with kids in a garden setting directly, but that was the first part of my career. And when, when you were talking, I could really envision some of those prompts and, the idea of the last minute literacy, because I was never a classroom teacher, but I worked with students in the South Carolina Botanical Garden for about 10 years. That was always my go-to, to engage, was to find a book that would connect. And that has stuck with me all these years. And so that's why every teacher who signs up for our school gardening class gets either your book or one of the other Readers to Eaters books, or Gail Gibbons, or, they get something, because that's such, it's such a important way, I think, to connect kids to what they're doing in the garden. And then it also, in your case, having been a librarian and the way you just approached all that with the poems, I mean, my big thing is getting kids to see that there's more to gardening than just growing the food, and that's so exciting to me, that they can be artistic and they can make a poster. I mean, you don't have to be the physical one who's out there, hauling the dirt. You can be the one who's communicating. And we actually do that in our school garden class. We actually break down the teams, amongst even the educators, to the communicator, the fundraiser, whatever those are. So, I mean, you showed the teamwork and all that in our school garden, and it's the best book. It's the best.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm looking forward to the dirt book too.
No.
Yeah.
I like decomposers.
Ben grows mushrooms, and they're awesome.
Oh, nice.
Yeah, that's a big. The symbiotic word is a big word in the mushroom tree community. There's a lot of symbiotic relationships with that, roots and fungi.
Yeah, we have a lot of. I go out in the fall and harvest chanterelles and morels at sometime in the spring. They're harder to find here.
Yeah, that here too. But yeah, well, thank you again for presenting. I agree with the poems and the victory gardens. There was a lot of good information, takeaways for educators and the libraries. Where talking about working teachers in the local libraries. I know schools have libraries, but just tapping into the local library system would be huge too, just for ideas and collaboration. But again, thank you. Great presentation.
Thank you.
And unfortunately, raspberries, I saw your granddaughter picking those raspberries. It's not one of our top crops in South Carolina. The heat and humidity tend to get to them, although there are some little, areas you can grow them, but those ever-bearing ones sound delightful, but a bit out of reach for our subtropical climate.
So what are common food that the kids get to grow at the school garden?
Well, for our program, we really looked at, the year round, because we have a 365-day growing season all throughout South Carolina. There's literally not a time when there can't be something growing. So right now, if everybody would have sweet potatoes still in the garden, then we'll transition to broccoli and carrots, radishes, lettuce, peas. This is not in order. I'm just babbling. Green beans, squash. We'll actually do green beans and squash this month. So if you're following our planting plan, you will have time to get one last little warm season push out before they, we lose the daylight, as the days get shorter and we kind of lose our pollinators and things, but have fewer pollinators. Yeah. And then we kind of go through the whole season. We do collards, kale, lots and lots of kale and collards. All that stuff grows right through the winter here. Yeah. What I miss, Ben? Megan, what I miss? Beets. And
say broccoli?
Broccoli in the fall. Mm-hmm.
Sweet potatoes.
Yep.
Collards, cabbage, lettuce, kale mixture, depending on
the year. So really those cool season, brassica crops, they do great here in our winters because they're, fairly mild, and even with a little frost, they get sweeter and do well. So we are very fortunate to be able to do that year round, and not really, but it also means we have also the year round disease and insect pressures as well. So, take the good with the bad.
That's great. Well, it's always interesting for us to see how kids taste food at the garden. Like I said, when and this goes back to when we were saying with talking about tasting, it's like how kids model, other kids trying new food, and it's like the garden really is the best place. Like when everybody has to come down the line and try something, that's really the time where they kind of experiment a little bit, So even more than trying new food at home. And so that's what we find in a lot of research and reading that we come across, so they model other kids and see what they eat.
Exactly. Well, of course, the sweet potatoes are a big hit, Yeah. Who doesn't love a sweet potato? But then you get into the kale and the broccoli and some of the other things, it gets a little dicey. So,
yeah. Cool. That's
and we also, with our program, we talk a lot about worm composting. Unfortunately, I'm not aware of many. There are some paid compost pickup programs, where you, like, as an organization, a school or a big institution might have a composting service that would come and take your food scraps away, but it's not something that's common on the curb, like, what you were talking about, Rick. But we are really trying to hit the food waste issue by, educating about it, and also by implementing worm composting bins at schools. And some schools are actually doing really large scale composting projects. They're working with our Department of Health and Environmental Control group. They have a whole group that just focuses on compost, and particularly at schools. So it's on our radar, but it's not yet something that you're gonna, just put your bin out of food scraps on the curb yet, but hopefully one day. So, all right. Thank y'all for the nice comments. Everybody, this is a quiet group, but they had a lot to say in the chat, and you could tell they were listening. And we got to see some great familiar faces, and we're glad that so many of the 4-H agents are here today, and master gardeners. And wish more of our educators could be here, but we know they're getting their classrooms ready or are actually in the class already with their students. So I think we'll share this video with everyone, and we're going to compile all the links, and I'm going to put together all 3 of the YouTube links in one go, so everybody will just have it all in one place as a into the summer wrap up. And Rick, I want to thank you for helping usher us back to school. It seems so early since seems like we just got out. But this is really an energizing and inspiring way to start the school year for our school gardeners across the state. And we can't thank you and Philip and Ben enough for being with us today. So,
well, thank you both. I mean, really, it's been a great summer program. Yeah. Thank you.
Thank you. All right.
Well, great. You take care.
On the flip side with emails to everyone. So have a good afternoon, y'all, and we'll talk to you soon. Thanks, Rick. Thanks, Philip. Thanks, Megan, for keeping us straight.
Y'all have a good one.
Thanks, you too.